A very long time ago, when there were no phones and no McDonald's and the roads were all dirt tracks, a man called Mr. Payne started a Sunday school at Horsham Down School. He came on his horse, but soon he got a car. It was pretty flash for those days. The mums and dads decided to come to Sunday school too, and that's how Horsham Downs Church got started.
I can remember that, but it wasn't until 1923 that they started having the services in the hall. Church wasn't till 2 o'clock, which kept on going for quite a long time, but it made it possible for them to take the service in Hamilton in the morning and then come out for lunch or dinner and then take the afternoon service. A lot of the poor farmers would doze off. It was
4 hymns and the readings and prayers and the sermon, 1 hour service, and we were done. Yeah.
For 30 years, the church met in a shared hall. But one day, someone said, "Let's build a building for the church." They had a special meeting and wrote notes in a big book, and that made the idea become real. Now they just needed a place to build it.
Addie Henderson had that block of land, and he was part of the Henderson family. That block of land was split off for Addie, and he had a dairy farm there, and he gave the land for the church.
It was a huge blessing to the community to have that land donated.
I was too young then to recall the planning that went beforehand. I just remember the actual building and watching the progress, and just checked it out and generally took an interest in it.
It really wasn't looked as a Presbyterian church at that stage, it was looked at a community church. And then once it was built, they said, well, we really need to put it into some organisation so that it's looked after in the long term. And so it was decided that seeing the Preslys were the biggest church, that it would go into the Presley system.
There was a special meeting when the new church was opened. It was made of bricks and had a steeple, so people driving past could tell it was a church. In those days, the dads wore suits to church, and the mums wore hats, and the boys pulled their socks up a long way. Families thought that church was a very important part of life.
It wasn't just a church. I came into some established leadership teams. In Horsham Downs' case, just long-term committed men and their wives and families to the health and well-being of Horsham Downs Church.
In the 1970s and 80s, lots of people moved away from the country and into the city, and the church got smaller. Other country churches were closing, and Horsham Downs had to decide if they should too. It was a very hard decision.
1983 to 84 was a significant turning point, I think, for Horsham Downs. And when I consider the health and well-being of Horsham Downs today, I think in a sense it started there.
As elders, the guys and we in the meetings were really fervently praying what was God's will in this. Were we to literally shut the door and everybody moved to town, which was certainly a trend.
They thought and prayed through the whole issue of where they wanted to go as a church and whether or not they needed to go to a weekly gathering.
Everyone worked together, and soon more people started to join the church again. We were teenagers, children, mums and dads, and even clowns.
So when new families came, particularly when they had several children, it was a huge blessing and we got quite excited. And I remember there was a time when, I think it was within quite a short space of time, both the Harding family and the Pollards came. we thought, why are we driving past this little church each week? And we've never dropped in there to see what it's like. And so we decided one morning that's what we'd do. And looking back, I think, yes, probably the arrival of 6 people into little Horsham Downs Church sitting there on the hill was probably quite significant. And so when we arrived, there was about probably 40 people there, I think. And I guess we felt straight away quite at home, and that genuine feeling that we were warmly welcomed there, and that was the major thing for us, a really significant thing. So we ended up coming back and coming back and coming back, and that was 30 years ago almost.
Up till now, Fairfield Presbyterian Church looked after Horsham Downs and made sure it was okay. But Horsham Downs was getting bigger, and God had some people inside the church who could lead and care for it. It was another step in growing up and growing older.
It was quite a bit later on, in the early 90s, that Horsham Downs' growth came to the point where they could commission Brian White and Max Pollard, who were both part of the preaching team, as part-time pastors there. And so they provided a more consistent leadership in Horsham Downs from the early 90s onwards.
The brick church was getting full and a bit squishy, so they moved into the community hall to make room. Everyone could spread out again.
The decision to move into the hall just was a natural progression from where we were moving to as a church, and we just so appreciated the space.
And I remember those first few weeks in the hall. It felt huge, we felt small. One stage we thought, oh, we're just going to take up half the hall. We'd put up areas of block out to get people to just sit in that area, but very quickly it filled up. It was absolutely amazing.
The children took over the brick church. It was painted yellow, and they called it the Yellow Room because it was yellow, and they called the children's church Sparks. Then they added some more rooms and a kitchen. They were called the Green Room, the Orange Room, but the kitchen was just called the kitchen. And then the church had to make a hard decision.
Although we were connected with the Presbyterian denomination, I discovered that within the church there weren't many people who were totally committed to Presbyterianism. Many had come from very different backgrounds, but we all had a similar goal, to find a church that was Bible-based, had good worship, good youth work, and they were the things that brought us together.
It was clear from my conversations with them that they were governed not primarily by negative issues, but by a positive sort of vision about the future of wanting to be free to pursue what they felt was going to be the best for them, that would lead to a more healthy and growing church. And so they decided to become fully independent.
The things that began to separate us from the Presbyterian church, which wasn't really my idea, the elders already had that in mind, were things like baptism by immersion, believers' baptism, leadership of communion, and things like doctrine, which the Presbyterian Church itself was going through a huge discovery in terms of what they actually believed, and they were divided, no doubt about that.
I was disappointed in the decision, and the primary reason for that, from my point of view, was that Horsham Downs was an inspiration. It was growing, it was healthy. This was in contrast to many of our churches in the region. And I saw Horsham Downs having a witness into the wider church about what's possible in today's world. And I felt that that witness was going to be lost for the Presbyterian fold, which in fact is how it eventuated. So that was the main reason for my disappointment. But we let them go with our blessing. What else can you do? They had a real sense of the Lord leading them, and so we encouraged them in that to a certain extent.
The process of leaving was more than just the doctrinal and the lifestyle issues. I think that we had satisfied ourselves that these were reasons enough to leave, but the Presbyterians felt that they still owned the property, and that created a little bit of angst within the fellowship.
Even though it was hard, the church decided the best thing was to pay the money. Some people were grumpy about that, but they didn't stay grumpy for too long. They had work to do, like finding a new leader to come and lead the church. This time they looked outside Horsham Downs and they found someone special in South Auckland.
You know, arriving into Horsham Downs, I suppose the first impression is the sense of family. It's a church with multiple generations, and even though we're a bit bigger now than what we were 10 years ago, numerically, the feel's very similar. And when we arrived, there were just solid families. You know, not only mum, dad and the kids, but also grandparents, aunties and uncles. There was a sense of actually family doing life together around the essence of faith. And as you get to know them a bit, you realise too, some of those same families have been involved in this church since 1918. You know, that generational transfer, that growth. And so we're stewarding that as well, and that's exciting.
My belief is that Horsham Downs Church is built on generational blessing. Those foundational families and the generations that followed have provided stability. The stability which has enabled different leaders over the years to come into the church and build on that legacy.
I've been amazed at God's goodness and His provision. And I think back to a time many years ago when we were still, again, just in the little church building, and we were encouraged to sort of dream a bit about what could the place be like in 10 years' time and 20 years' time.
In 2016, the church got a new name, the Village Church. This was much easier to spell, but the church was also in Ngarawahia, and you can't call the church in Ngarawahia Horsham Downs Community Church. That doesn't even make sense.
This location and this church has been positioned for such a time as this. And why do I say that? Because we definitely are still slightly rural, but we're on the edge of one of the fastest growing cities in New Zealand, and we're probably in one of the fastest growing areas of it. And there's a shrinking line between us in the rural and what is urban. And there's this beautiful sense of community that God's forming out of it. And I don't know, I can't help but think this is quite strategic. And even just, you know, we're a part of the story right now that's 100 years old, and that story for us right now is helping us but also challenging us to dream the future with the extension of that story in mind, that this church is not about a moment, it's about a momentum. It's about a contribution that transcends just our own time, but potentially into those that follow even after we've been here.
100 years is a really long time. I wonder what God will do with us in the next 100.